We do welcome you back in to Live Now from Fox. I'm Austin Westfall, and joining me now for the latest on the Middle East is Hal Kempfer. He's a retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and the host of the Strat podcast. Hal, let's begin with Gaza. That's where we have to start today. President Trump has been chiming in on this ceasefire proposal that now Hamas has responded to. And Israel now saying that it's moving to a defensive operation in Gaza only. President Trump sending this out on social media within the past few hours. He says, "I appreciate that Israel has temporarily stopped the bombing in order to give the hostage release and peace deal a chance to be completed. Hamas must move quickly, or else all bets will be off. I will not tolerate delay," which many think will happen, or any outcome where Gaza poses a threat again. "Let's get this done fast. Everyone will be treated fairly," the president says. Hal, if both sides want to keep the U.S. happy, what has to happen next?
Well, Austin, they're going to have to move very quickly through this process. There's things that Netanyahu's coalition obviously doesn't like. Far-right members of his coalition actually rejected this proposal outright today. On the other hand, Hamas has some serious misgivings on it. They don't like the governance part of it. They want to be part of future governance. They don't want to be completely locked out. They don't like this idea of a peace board or peace commission, with Tony Blair and President Trump as the head of it. That was something they kind of rejected as well. They're talking about some sort of autocratic Palestinian authority, not quite clear what it is, and there's nothing like that exists currently. And then there's one thing that really is kind of the crux, which is the disarmament of Hamas. And that is something that they're having a very difficult time with. They're saying, well, maybe more offensive weapons like mortars and missiles and things that shoot longer distance, but not defensive weapons like machine guns and assault rifles and personal sidearms, things like that. And I don't think that's going to be acceptable, certainly to the Israelis. I don't think we're going to accept it either, because that's such a radical departure. And it doesn't do what everybody wants, which is to stop Hamas from being a threat. And then the other problem is Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Now, PIJ this morning said they kind of were going along with Hamas. They originally had pushed back, said Hamas wasn't speaking for them. They've kind of said sort of tentatively they have misgivings and not a lot to be negotiated, but they seem to be kind of going along with this, although there are reports coming out of Gaza that some of the units, the actual, the fighters themselves, small unit level, that they may actually refuse to lay down their arms. And so even if they do come to an agreement on that, it's not clear that the membership of Hamas, let alone the other organizations that are fighting the Israelis in Gaza, would go along with it. So there's just a lot of negotiation, a lot of work to be done.
What's the absolute soonest we could see the hostages returned at this point? Let's say negotiations go as quickly as possible. Best case scenario, when could we see it happen, in your opinion?
Theoretically, all right. Tomorrow, Sunday, is the deadline that President Trump imposed. Looking at what he just put out there, he doesn't seem like he's moving past that deadline. Theoretically, if they were to, everyone's to agree to this on Sunday, you could potentially see some, not all, but some hostages coming out as early as Monday. Definitely some coming out as early as Tuesday. But that's all premised on the idea that the deadline that President Trump set is one that Hamas would agree to. And certainly Israel has stopped offensive operations. They've gone to a defensive mode. So they're no longer doing strike missions. They're no longer taking buildings or taking terrain. So you could see some hostages getting released very quickly. The goal within the proposal was that all the hostages, living and deceased, would be released within 72 hours. So if everything was agreed to Sunday, I suppose you could start seeing things, you could see some movement on releasing hostages as early as Monday. And then theoretically, they could be wrapped up with all the hostages being released by Wednesday. But there is a fear Hamas has that once they release the hostages, that they've pretty much given up all their leverage. And PIJ has also expressed that same misgiving. And their fear is that they release the hostages and Israel finds a pretext to basically end the deal, so to speak, and it goes right back into where it was before, except they have no hostages that they can hold as leverage against Israel.
You know, I hate to do this to you, Hal, because it's impossible to know what exactly we're looking at on our screen here, but looks like it's kind of petering out a little bit. There was just it was a long-held flash that happened there. If we do see any lights or any blasts on this camera, that would mean, we presume that would mean it's either a defensive. It's certainly not an offensive, correct?
It should not be an offensive strike. That could be a defensive strike. And frankly, if that is a defensive strike and it's something as big as what that looks, that to me is a little concerning. That tells me that Hamas has not used this opportunity to stand down, that the IDF has gone to a defensive stance, but Hamas is still trying to take advantage of the situation. And that's disappointing. You know, all of this is about building at least some level, I'm not going to go so far as to say trust, but some level of goodwill or predictability that each side has for the other. And for this thing to work, Israel has to believe that Hamas will actually do what they say they're going to do. And of course, Hamas will have to also believe the same of Israel. And then you're talking about some of the other groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, et cetera. And just yesterday, you had a situation where there was a militia, kind of an organized crime militia that was controlling an area. Hamas went in there to essentially disarm them. And the militia actually went after Hamas. And sounds like they completely defeated the Hamas element that went in there. And these are Palestinians. This is not the IDF. This is a Hamas. This is a homegrown militia in the Gaza Strip. And then, according to the reports today, they were literally dragging Hamas, bodies through the streets, which is in a Middle East context, any context, that's a very derogatory thing to do. But it just tells you that Hamas does not have complete control of the ground like they would prefer the world to think, and they don't have control over all the elements that are actually, or armed elements that are actually in action, if you will, throughout Gaza.
For a moment, let's rewind to yesterday, Hal. When Hamas responded to the Trump peace proposal yesterday, it wasn't exactly a promise to immediately abide by the entirety of the plan. It wasn't a, yes, we agree to these terms, President Trump type of response. It was more complicated than that. And Trump, though, some of us speculated that Trump might not respond positively to that response, but instead what we saw was Trump immediately responding positively to Hamas. Hal, how would you describe Trump's strategy? And do you think that Trump surprised both Israel and Hamas with his quick positive response yesterday?
Well, I think he did. And I think what he wanted to do as quickly as possible was a positive response by Hamas, even with all the conditions and, oh, we still have to negotiate this and everything else that Hamas throws in there. He immediately jumped on that to try and get some momentum going. He also did something which is absolutely critical, is he boxed in Israel, or actually boxed in Netanyahu, by so vigorously talking about, saying this is great, this is where we need to go, we got to do some more work. It really kind of tied Netanyahu's hands. He couldn't sit there and, after he just agreed to it, he couldn't then easily turn around and say, "Oh no, we reject it," because, frankly, President Trump made the U.S. position clear, and with that, even though certainly Netanyahu is getting a lot of pressure from the more right-wing members of his coalition, he doesn't want to pick a fight with the U.S. He does not want to pick a fight with the number one supporter of Israel. He doesn't want to risk something like the U.S. withholding aid or arms shipments or anything else that Israel truly needs. And so it was an interesting strategy that he chose. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe they had kind of sort of at least informally war gamed based on, what if that this would be the response if Hamas came back with anything relatively positive. And Hamas didn't reject things outright so much as they kind of used sort of, non-specific language in such a way that the governance piece was kind of out, and so they got a lot of negotiation there, and of course the disarmament piece was out, and there's just more that they have to work with. So they kind of use this language saying, and they've done this before, which is they say, "Oh, we accept it," and then they try to change all the terms within it or change a lot of the terms within it, which actually kills the deal. And they'll certainly keep trying to do that here. That's just what they do. But we'll see what we can get as far as a final negotiated, if we can get a final negotiated agreement or settlement.
So the Associated Press says that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that he hopes to announce the release of all hostages from Gaza, quote, in the coming days. Talks are moving to Egypt, by the way. President Trump is sending 2 envoys to Egypt this weekend to work on it. That's happening as we speak. And by the way, we're speaking at about 4 p.m. Eastern time, just past it. As we speak this hour, Hal, how optimistic are we that a deal will get done?
Well, I want to say this is the most positive I've seen so far. Of all the deals, of all the proposals over the last 2 years, this one has more momentum and more possibility than anything we've seen so far. And politically, it would be difficult for Netanyahu to completely back away from this without risking a lot on the table, not the least of which is the relationship with President Trump and the relationship of Israel with the United States. So he is, as I mentioned, boxed in more or less. With that said, this thing could go south, and certainly the armed wing, the Gaza side of Hamas, has not been particularly amenable to this. They've kind of agreed to it, sort of, but does seem to be a little tension or disagreement within Hamas itself, and that's something that's been talked about a lot. That they're having a very difficult time building a consensus response to this proposal. So this thing could drag on, and if President Trump, sticks to what he just, texted about, then they could go past the deadline, not have something viable to work with, and then that's that. And it would go back to Israel, and Israel will go back into offensive warfare, and that bloody house to house, block by block fighting in Gaza City.
So here's something, and you know what? We will continue, of course, to track any pertinent developments as it relates to the ceasefire proposal, and we're on air for the next 3-4 hours here. So if anything major develops, we'll break in and we'll let everybody know. There's one more topic I wanted to hit on the Middle East with you before we move on to other parts of the world. Let's talk about Iran. Iran executed 6 death row inmates on Saturday, and Iran says that those inmates were killed for carrying out attacks on behalf of Israel. Human rights organizations say that they are appalled by a, quote, dramatic escalation in the number of executions in Iran, with more than 1,000 people killed during the first 9 months of this year. Hal, why so many executions in Iran lately? And from what you've seen, is there credible evidence that these inmates were working on behalf of Israel?
Some of them may have actually been Israeli agents. You can't rule that out, and Israel certainly doesn't confirm that any of them were. But a lot of it appears to be just going after internal enemies of the regime. Some of those that were executed actually had been involved with anti-government activities going back to 2009, well before the most recent conflict. And it was all about separatist stuff. It was an area in the southwest part of the country where they want to basically become autonomous and separate from Iran. And so they executed a number of their leaders. And it looks like they've just kind of gone through, and they do these executions to make a public statement, to make, to drive fear in the heart of anyone who would think to ever spy for Israel or work with Israel in any way, shape, or form, or any of the Western powers for that matter. But separately, it's also taking away a lot of the leadership of those parts of the country that are opposed to the current regime. And look, Iran is not just one unified Sunni Persian nation. Iran is a geographically very big country, and there are different ethnicities, nationalities, religions within Iran. that are encompassed within the country, but they're actually much closer to neighboring states, if you will. And there's Kurdish separatists within there. There's Armenian. There's a variety of different groups. There's Sunni, which is different from Shia Muslims within the country. There's parts of the country that are more Arab and not really ethnically Persian. And so those are also issues that Iran deals with. And the way they deal with it is a very draconian way, which is they tend to arrest people. They don't really have a jurisprudence system. They will torture people at the drop of a hat. And as you have talked about, they rely on executions, particularly public executions.
We need to hop over to Europe. There's a lot to discuss with Russia, with Ukraine, with NATO allies. We have lots more to discuss with Hal. He's going to be sticking around with us. Let's take a quick break. Our coverage is going to be continuing in a moment.